Some people don't remember the exact moment they became an adult, but deep down, they know their childhood ended earlier than it should have. Sometimes, it wasn't a single dramatic event. It was a slow realization that no one else was going to handle things. Maybe you were the one who had to stay calm while everyone else panicked. Maybe you learned early that being strong was the only option. While other kids worried about games and homework, you were quietly learning how to read emotions in a room. You became the listener, the problem solver, the mature one, the responsible one, and people probably praised you for it. They said you were wise beyond your years. But what they didn't see was what you quietly had to sacrifice to become that way. When a child is forced to grow up early, something unusual happens to their personality. They begin developing traits most people never build until much later in life. And over time, those traits quietly shape how they move through the world. They often feel different in social spaces, more observant, more aware, sometimes more tired than others their age. But here's the surprising part. Many of these traits are actually extremely rare. Traits that form only when life forces someone to mature early. Traits that shape the way they think, feel, and understand people. So if you were someone who had to grow up faster than you should have, you might recognize many of the signs we're about to explore. Because people who were forced to grow up early often develop a set of rare psychological traits, traits that make them strong, but also sometimes quietly exhausted. And the first trait is something most people don't even realize they have. It's a form of awareness that develops in childhood when paying attention wasn't optional. The first rare trait is hyper-awareness of people's emotions. People who grew up too fast often develop the ability to sense subtle emotional shifts others completely miss. As a child, you may have learned to read the room before saying a word, not because you wanted to, but because it helped you stay safe. You could tell when someone was about to get angry. You could sense tension before anyone said anything. Over time, your brain became extremely skilled at detecting emotional signals, tiny changes in tone, facial expressions, even silence. As an adult, this often shows up as strong emotional intuition. You can feel when something is off, even when others say everything is fine. This ability can make you very empathetic, but it can also make crowded social environments mentally exhausting. Because while most people only hear the words in a conversation, you hear the emotions underneath them. And after years of doing this automatically, your mind rarely turns this ability off. The second trait many people notice is that you always seemed older than everyone around you. Teachers may have called you mature. Adults might have said you were easy to talk to, but what looked like maturity was often early emotional adaptation. When life introduces responsibility too early, the brain begins developing emotional regulation faster than normal. You may have been the one comforting others. Even when you were the youngest in the room, you learned how to stay calm during difficult situations, because someone had to. But emotional maturity at a young age has a hidden side. Sometimes it means you skipped parts of childhood others were allowed to experience. Instead of learning how to be carefree, you learned how to be responsible. And while that maturity becomes a strength later in life, it can also leave you feeling older than your peers. Sometimes, even when you're surrounded by people, you still feel slightly out of place. Not because you don't care about others, but because your mind has been navigating deeper emotional waters for a long time. And this leads to the third rare trait people often develop after growing up too early, a quiet belief that they are responsible for everyone else's well-being. The third rare trait is feeling responsible for everyone around you. People who had to grow up early often carry an invisible sense of emotional duty. As a child, you may have learned that other people's moods could affect the entire environment, so you quietly tried to keep things stable. You became the mediator, the one who tried to calm situations before they escalated. Over time, this creates a powerful psychological habit. You begin to feel responsible for emotions that were never actually yours to carry. As an adult, this can show up in subtle ways. You might automatically try to fix people's problems. You may feel uncomfortable when someone around you is upset, even if their emotions have nothing to do with you. And sometimes, you carry more emotional weight than anyone realizes. The fourth trait often develops quietly. It's a deep habit of handling everything alone. If you had to become independent early, your brain learned something very specific. It learned that relying on others wasn't always safe, or sometimes simply wasn't possible. So instead of asking for help, you learned how to figure things out yourself. Over time, this becomes hyper-independence, a strength that makes you incredibly capable. But it also creates a quiet difficulty. Letting people support you can feel unfamiliar, not because you don't appreciate help, but because your mind learned to survive without it. And sometimes, carrying everything alone becomes exhausting. Another quiet trait many people develop is the fear of becoming a burden to others. When a child grows up seeing adults overwhelmed, they often decide something important very early. They decide not to add more weight to the situation. So they start handling their emotions privately. Instead of asking for support, they become quiet about their struggles. As adults, this can create a powerful internal rule. Don't inconvenience anyone. Even when you're going through something difficult, you may hesitate to talk about it, because somewhere deep down, your mind still remembers trying to make life easier for everyone else. But here's something important to understand. These traits didn't appear by accident. They formed because your mind adapted to circumstances most children never had to face. And that adaptation shaped the way you see the world today. And the next rare trait might be one of the most powerful of all: a deep ability to understand people on a level many others never reach. The sixth rare trait is deep emotional intelligence. People who had to grow up early often develop a powerful understanding of human emotions. As a child, you may have spent years observing people closely, watching how their tone, expressions, and behavior changed in different situations. Over time, this creates a rare ability. You begin to understand emotions even when people struggle to explain them. Sometimes people feel strangely comfortable opening up to you, even if they just met you. Because you don't just listen to words, you listen to what people are trying to say underneath them. This ability makes you incredibly empathetic, but it can also make emotional boundaries difficult. Sometimes you carry feelings that were never yours, simply because you understand them so clearly. Another rare trait people develop after growing up early is a powerful intuition about others. After years of reading emotional environments, your brain begins recognizing patterns automatically. You can often sense someone's intentions quickly, sometimes within just a few minutes of meeting them. You notice inconsistencies others miss, small changes in tone, posture, or energy. And because of this awareness, you may trust your instincts more than most people do. But there is a side effect to this level of perception. Your mind rarely stops analyzing people, which leads to another very common trait. When you grow up navigating complex emotional environments, your brain learns to think several steps ahead. You begin predicting how conversations might unfold, or how someone might react to certain words. Your mind becomes skilled at scanning for potential problems, almost like a radar constantly searching the environment. This ability can make you very thoughtful and careful, but it can also make relaxation difficult. Even when nothing is wrong, your mind may continue analyzing situations, replaying conversations, imagining different outcomes. Because for many people who grew up too early, thinking ahead once helped them stay safe. But now, that same mental habit continues even when the danger is gone. And this leads to another trait many people with early maturity experience: a strange difficulty with simply relaxing. The ninth rare trait many people develop after growing up too early is a difficulty with relaxing. When childhood requires constant awareness, the brain learns to stay prepared. Your mind becomes used to scanning the environment, looking for signs that something might go wrong. And even when life becomes calmer later on, that alertness can remain. Sometimes this shows up as restlessness, or the strange feeling that you should always be doing something productive. Because when you were younger, being still may not have been an option, so the idea of slowing down can feel unfamiliar, even when you deserve the rest. But there is one final trait many people develop when they grow up early, and it may be the most powerful one of all. It's a kind of quiet resilience, the ability to endure difficult things without breaking. Because when life challenges you early, your mind learns how to adapt. You learn how to remain steady during emotional storms. Even when others around you feel overwhelmed, this resilience doesn't always look dramatic. Often it appears as quiet strength, the ability to keep going, even when things feel heavy. And many people who develop this resilience rarely talk about it, because to them it simply feels normal. If you were forced to grow up early, there is a good chance you developed many of these traits. You may be more aware of emotions than most people, more responsible than you ever expected to be. You might sometimes feel older than those around you, or wonder why certain things seem easier for others. But the truth is, your mind adapted to circumstances that required strength early in life. Those experiences shaped your awareness, your empathy, your intuition, and your resilience. But something important is often forgotten. Strength that forms through survival also deserves healing. You were strong because you had to be, not because you were supposed to carry everything alone. And as life moves forward, you are allowed to grow in a different way, not just through responsibility, but through understanding yourself. Because sometimes the people who grew up the earliest are the ones who spend the rest of their lives learning how to finally rest.